Are you with us tonight?
We're here.
Yes, we are.
Welcome, gentlemen.
George, let's start with you. Let's start with your background and give our listeners just a little bit of background about yourself.
Well, basically, before the Mars research, I started out as an artist, originally from New Jersey, background in drawing, painting, and sculpture. I was the past president of the New Jersey Sculptors Association around 1999 through 2001. As an artist, I exhibited out New Jersey, New York. I also exhibited up in New York at the O.K. Harris Gallery, which is run by Ivan Karp.
And Bill, I was curious about you. What is your background?
I'm originally from Edmonton, Alberta, and I graduated from the University of Alberta in Edmonton in 1977 with a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in geomorphology. And then I moved to Calgary, a few hours south, and went to work in as a geological consultant and exploration and development geologist in petroleum industry here in Calgary, and I'm still currently doing that work.
Excellent. Okay. George, what is the Cydonia Institute?
It's a group of researchers that I put together back in 1991 after reading a book by Randolfo Capuzzo titled The Face on Mars, Evidence for a Lost Civilization. After reading the book, I became convinced that there was really interesting structures on the surface of Mars, and I had a few friends that were interested in this idea, and put together a group of researchers early on, and that's basically how the research group started, just a group of interested people that I had known.
Hey, Bill, when did you become a member of the Cydonia Institute?
Well, shortly after, in 1998, shortly after the Mars Global Surveyor had started taking pictures of the Cydonia area, and Richard Hoagland had a website, Enterprise Mission, and there was some forums on there discussing the images that were coming over, and I started to see some very unusual formations, and having a background in geomorphology, I couldn't explain how all these different features that I was seeing could be explained by physical features that we see, or physical phenomena we see on Earth. And I started communicating with the forum, and George was the first one to respond to some of my comments, and so we started emailing each other back and forth and sharing information. And then George sent me some very interesting work that he had done. He entitled it Two-Faced, and I read through it, and I was very impressed, and decided to join George in his research.
And it is with regard to the, I suppose the face on Mars. Is that what got you interested in Mars?
Yes, in 1976, when the original Viking orbiter, took the original picture of the face on Mars, I saw it in the newspaper, and I remember thinking, and I can remember the exact moment, sitting on the carpet with the newspaper spread open and going, "Oh my God, that's incredible! That has to be artificial." And then, of course, it sort of disappeared over the years from people's consciousness, and then in 1991. I was alerted to the work of Richard Hoagland and his team as to what they had pursued in studying the Cydonia area around the face, and that got me really interested.
Interesting.
I believe his book was the Monuments of Mars.
Right, I remember that very well, and I also watched the documentary that was done parallel to it. Do you, I suppose, aside from Richard Hoagland, and this is for both you and George. Do you feel that by the time you started looking into this, was there already a groundwork laid? I guess you've already mentioned Richard Hoagland, but were there other inspirations as well for both of you to bring you to this conclusion in the research you had done, resulting in what came out of 2005?
Well, I had a similar experience from what Bill had. After looking at Puzo's book, I was introduced to Richard Hoagland by a friend of mine who had seen an ad for his Monuments of Mars on late-night TV up in New Jersey. And actually, Richard Hoagland lived right up there in New Jersey, not far from where I was living. And at the time, he had put out a journal, which is a quarterly that I had ordered, and he actually had his home phone number right on the back of the journal. So I had given him numerous calls, trying to, of course, everyone wants to meet Richard Hoagland, and trying to, find out if anything I was finding in some of these images was something that he'd be interested in. So, like Bill Saunders, I also, was introduced to the Monuments of Mars. And through that book, I think Bill and I, we found out about people like Mark Horlato, who was very instrumental in us coming to some of the realizations that we found with these features on the surface of Mars. What you say, Bill?
Yes, definitely. And of course, in Richard's book, he mentioned other researchers like DiPietro and Molinard and Errol Torn. There was a number of other researchers whose work in the early 80s also contributed to Richard Hoagland's work, and also were aiding in convincing me that the structures were artificial in some manner.
I remember reading the first book, the Cydonia Codex, in 2005, and I just remember thinking this was one monumental task, even over 10 years. And I was just wondering, for both of you, did you come up with a game plan, or was it just catch as catch can, or how did you even figure out a groundwork to go from in terms of covering the expansive subject that is in both books?
Well, George, if you'll let me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but George had a background in Mesoamerican art and sculpture, and I find it extremely ironic that this is the case, because it was a culmination of serendipitous occurrences and George's hard digging into Mesoamerican art and sculpture that actually allowed this book to unfold the way it did. A lot of the images that you see in the Cydonia Codex were, or at least the ones that I found, were found without any real knowledge or association with North, Central, and South American art and sculpture and religion or anything else. And it just seemed as anything I uncovered, George was thumbing through his art books and whatnot and finding connections to their society. And it just kept on. As I said, some of it was hard work and some of it was just serendipitous. I know with myself, sometimes I'd just open up a book and it just happened to be on a page that matched something I had just found on the surface of Mars. It was actually quite an incredible few years.
Well, George,
yeah, Rick, to expand on what Bill has said, in the beginning, when NASA took this picture of the face on Mars, and of course it was released in 1976 during that summer, and NASA quickly came out and said that they had taken, another picture a couple hours or days later, and it had disappeared and was just found to be an effect of light and shadow, and the second picture they took, showed that it was just a mesa. And Richard Hoagland, when he came out with his book, he had put up the premise that this original Viking image, he had the side which was the western side, which got most of the light in the Viking image, which you saw this human, almost like a portrait of an individual with a big helmet, and it looked very human. And what he did originally was, I guess, using the mirroring technique. He wanted to see, after Mark Carlotto had enhanced some of the Viking imagery and using some of the work that DePetro and Molinari did, Hoagland, I guess, just on a whim, decided to mirror the humanoid side just to see what it would look like. And to his amazement, it really looked like a humanoid type face. And then he just mirrored the eastern side, which we now see has this feline aspect. So he was amazed that we were seeing this human feline aspect in the face on Mars, and of course he made all of these connections early on with Egyptian culture, relating the face on Mars to like the Sphinx, which has the embodiment of the human and feline, which is like the animal world and the human, in this amalgamation into nature, this human feline type of idea that you see in Egyptian art with the Sphinx. And right from that point on, most early researchers like myself and Bill, we were viewing the Sphinx in Egypt with this direct connection with the face on Mars, that possibly when we got better pictures of the other structures in the area, that we would probably be seeing Egyptian pyramids, and the face on Mars was very Egyptian. However, when we got the 1998 image of the face on Mars, a lot of people were disappointed in what they saw because they had preconceived ideas about what the face should look like. NASA was trying to convince the public that the face on Mars was a human face, something like you'd see with like Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra. It should be symmetrical. However, with Richard Hoagland's early research in his experiments, he saw that it was possibly a bifurcated face. And myself, with my history in art and looking at Mesoamerican cultures and Egyptian cultures and other European cultures, none of them had this bifurcated idea. But when we got the 1998 image, one thing that Bill and I noticed was this emblem on the top forehead of the humanoid side. And when we duplicated the mirroring technique that Richard Hoagland did, we saw that the humanoid side of the face, the emblem that was over there on the top of the head, created this tri-leaf symbol. And that's basically what got us down the path of Mesoamerica, because like Bill was saying, I did all kinds of research trying to find this tri-leaf symbol within Egyptian culture, and I couldn't find anything. And I was in a Barnes & Noble going through some books, and I had this book on Linda Shelley, which had all these drawings and all of these diagrams and images of Mesoamerican art. And right there in the book, I saw this mask that had this tri-leaf symbol on the forehead. And I'm like, my God, this is just like we're seeing on the face on Mars. And initially, I didn't even know that Mesoamerican culture made these bifurcated masks with human and feline masks. The first clue we had was this tri-leaf symbol on the forehead. And that's what led us down that path. And like Bill was saying, everything he was finding and sending me links, I quickly went over and checked out some Mesoamerican iconography, and sure enough, there it was. So that's what was serendipity, and it just all seemed to fall in place after that.
George,
sorry I was so long-winded.
That's okay.
It's okay.
George, what other parallels have you found between the Maya and the Cydonia face?
Well, over the years, especially with the 1998 image and, of course, the new Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, everything we find, the more pictures NASA takes of the face on Mars, it not only looks more and more like Mesoamerican iconography, as opposed to NASA saying, the more pictures they take, it doesn't look like a human face, because it's not a human face. It's a bifurcated mask, just like we're seeing in the Mesoamerican culture with this humanoid on one side and a feline on the other. And we found at least, 12 or 13 points of iconographic markers that we're finding in Mesoamerican art. To begin with the face on Mars, of course, we found the tri-leaf symbol at the forehead. That tri-leaf symbol is a symbol of corn. It's a corn sprout. And a lot of the lords and the elite in these representations of masks and artwork, we would see this tri-leaf symbol on the forehead. The face on Mars obviously has a human eye on the humanoid side. It also has this flanged headdress when you do the duplication of the split mask just to make the symmetry. That's what Hoagland had looked at early on with this flanged headdress, which he interpreted as being this more of a connection to Egyptian art. And doing our research, I found that the Olmec culture not only had this tri-leaf symbol on the forehead, they also wore flanged-type headdress that looked very much like Egyptian art. There's a lot of controversy about the early Olmec culture in the Mesoamerican studies that, is it connected to Africa? You have these huge, colossal heads that are found that are carved, these huge head portraits that look very Negroid. They have very African features to the eyes, nose, and mouth. So even today, there's a lot of controversy in the Mesoamerican community discussing the origins of this Olmec culture. And all of this iconography comes right out of the Olmec culture that we're finding on the face on Mars.
Okay.
And another problem with the early images from even 1998 with the face on Mars, a lot of detractors of the face said, well, there's no real nose formation. I mean, yes, we'll grant you there's an eye formation. There seems to be some decorative ornamentation on the forehead and around the mouth. But the mouth, there's a main tooth which has a circular dot on it, and that is indicative of dental implants that Mesoamerican cultures utilize. Again, another marker for Mesoamerican culture. The nose seems to be obscured by this moth or butterfly shape. It's an enormous formation covering the nose, and we find the same scenario in Mesoamerican art where they produce these large gold structures that go over, or these little ornaments that go over the nose, and they're usually made in the shape of a butterfly or a moth. And this whole idea of moths and butterflies deals with transformation. So you're seeing this human face on one side and the feline on the other, which is a marker, again, for transformation. And the iconography on the face on Mars, again, refers to this idea of transformation. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the butterfly, but the butterfly actually starts out, and the moth is a caterpillar. And they go into a cocoon, and then they transform into this beautiful moth or butterfly. So that's where this whole idea of transformation comes. And this symbol is used in Mesoamerican art for the idea of transformation. And we're finding that right on the face on Mars also.
Excellent.
So that's what we were really intrigued by, that not only did we start seeing this symbolism with the tri-leaf formation on the forehead, everything else in the face started to make more sense to us because it was directly related to these iconographic symbols in Mesoamerican art. And then the feline side basically shows a feline mask with a zigzag shape like a mane or a beard. And Bill and I initially, we were like confused. Well, if this is all, this iconography on the face on Mars deals with Mesoamerican culture, why is there a mane on this feline face? Of course, lions and things like that are in Africa, not in Mesoamerica. But again, doing the research, we find that the Mesoamerican culture, the Maya, the Aztec, had this mythological creature they called a bearded jaguar, which had a false beard. So what we're seeing here on the face on Mars is not really a lion, it's a bearded jaguar. And again, right out of Mesoamerican culture. So the more questions we had, they were easily answered through Mesoamerican iconography. And like all of the research we've done with the face, all these other formations that we find around the face in Cydonia and other parts of the planet all seem to just be explained through this iconography from Mesoamerica.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, I was going to say, I know that a lot of it centers around the relationship between the Mayan and Martian geographs, but you've also mentioned Aztec and Olmec as well. Does this suggest a historical link between all of those Central and South American cultures with Mars? And you've mentioned the other geoglyphs. Is the face the only two-faced structure on Mars?
Well, there's other two-face structures. That, like I said, our early research, we focused on the face on Mars because that was what Bill and I, when we initially got involved in this, we were interested to see what this face on Mars was and what the NASA photographs were saying or showing us. And looking at the other structures in the Cydonia area as possible analogs to the face on Mars, that we would may possibly find the same two-faced aspect in other mesas, you know, with quotation marks, mesas. Directly below the face on Mars was another mesa that Dr. Tom Van Tranlen initially called the animal. We looked at that and we just simply cut it in half and did a duplication, and we found more Mesoamerican iconography.
Interesting. The with that,
which is all this is explained in the first book.
Right. With
for those at home that want to rush out and buy the book.
And they definitely should too. I would recommend it, but I'm looking forward to reading the second one as well. The with regard to the fact that obviously historically we're establishing a relationship here between Mars and Earth, specifically at this point, Mesoamerican cultures, and it begs the question: have you found any examples of these, you know, elsewhere? Specifically, any specific examples of the facial geoglyphs on Earth?
We really haven't found any bifurcated examples on Earth. However, down in southern Peru, in Corral, Peru, in 2001, they found a huge geoglyph that is just half of a face, which we mentioned in the first book. And that's pretty interesting because we also found not only these bifurcated formations on Mars, we also find these mesas and formations that are just half of a face, which is the whole idea, again, which we explain in the book about this ceremonial thing of cutting sculptures and mask in half and burying one half of the figurine or the mask with a deceased lord, and then keeping the other half above with the living family. So this whole idea of putting one piece of the sculpture in the underworld and keeping the other with the living people, which again, you know, goes hand in hand with all this Mesoamerican mythology. It's pretty amazing when you stand back, and if the listeners out there decide that they want to purchase these two books, it's just mind-blowing that all of these structures that we're finding have direct relationships with this iconography of Mesoamerica. It's just repetitive over and over and over.
You know what? I mean, I understand the term geoglyph, but for the sake of the audience, why would these structures be called geoglyphs? Where is the term inspired by?
Phil?
Well, basically, geo in Earth terms, geo means Earth, and we don't really have a term to use for other planets, so we use the same terms that we use on Earth. So geo means of the Earth, and glyph is, of course, people are familiar with hieroglyphs with Egypt, but other cultures use glyphs as well, and those being symbols, pictographic symbols representing different things. In the case of the Maya, the Mesoamericans, their biggest use of glyphs was faces, and as George mentioned, they demonstrated the motif of bifurcated faces, human feline, but they also demonstrated the use of bifurcated face to show duality in life and death. If you go down to the Yucatan Peninsula today, you could even find these bifurcated masks continuing to be made by modern artists, and they're can be found on roadside stands along the highways, and it's a part of the culture that has survived for who knows how long. As George said, the half face in Corral it's about 5,000 years old. So the use of half and bifurcated images in the Americas dates back a long, long way.
Okay, gentlemen, what I'd love to ask you guys is, do you have to mirror many of the faces to be able to see them?
Well, that's kind of subjective. It is difficult. These structures, for some reason, are hidden. They're created to look like normal geological features, and we're not exactly sure why this is the case. They can be seen if you're used to seeing it. I have been looking at, George and I have been looking at these for over 10 years, and I'm finding that it's much easier now. I see, looking at some of these NASA images, I see half faces quite easily now compared to 10 years ago. It was kind of a training of the brain, I guess, to be able to see them. But once you do mirror them, and then you take the mirror away, it's easy to see the half image.
Once you become familiar with the whole, that's why we call it a codex, because it's like you have to break the code.
Okay.
And once you figure out that looking at the face on Mars, that it's actually two different faces and not a symmetrical face, like, you know, NASA has been trying to convince the public. When the public looks at, you know, just concentrating on the face on Mars here, that your average citizen, when they say that, oh, you found a face on Mars, they're going to look at it and, of course, think that it looks like Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra. But actually, it's a bifurcated face. It's two different faces. And, of course, it's a huge landform that's been altered to have these features. And right from the beginning, they have difficulty seeing it. But we found through having talks and doing book signings and doing lectures and appearing at different functions, that once you know, you have a one-on-one rapport with someone and you're showing them these images and you're showing them where the eye feature is, where the nose is, and where the mouth is, and where the iconography symbols are and what they are, they become amazed, and they can actually see these features without it being mirrored. So then you can show them the actual face on Mars in the raw, and it's readily seen, especially the feline side, which is in much better shape than the humanoid side, I believe. The feline side, once you see the feline aspect of the face on Mars, it just jumps out at you. And it doesn't have to be mirrored. We basically mirror these, you know, so the average viewer, it's easier for them to comprehend what we're looking at. But we're not saying that these things have to be mirrored. And we also, in the new book, we no longer use the term mirroring,
okay,
because it's really frowned upon by most researchers. And we found that archaeologists actually do mirroring, but they would never use the word mirroring. They call
okay.
it duplication or reconstruction.
Duplication and reconstruction.
Right. So I spent years looking for references of archaeologists mirroring things, couldn't find a thing. And then once I found out what the terms they use are different, then it was a lot easier to find. And we actually list almost a dozen examples of archaeologists in the new book that use this technique in their research when they're trying to figure out what these complex Mesoamerican artworks are. And it's used in their research. So
and
the
can I
mirroring
also
is yes, Bill?
I was just going to say, perspective is a huge thing because these structures are very, very large, and they're more created like mosaics rather than actual sculptures. So if you zoom in too close, you totally lose the perspective altogether. We found so far structures or images, I should say, in the rock from, we'll say, a few hundred meters to many kilometers in size or many miles in size. And so you have to, and some of these images are built within the same structure and sometimes at different angles. So you have to have the proper perspective. That's very important.
Okay.
Well, the perspective, it's like looking at the Mona Lisa from the proper perspective. You can see the face, the smile, the famous Mona Lisa smile. But if you get up too close, you know, a lot of people are putting a lot of stock in this new Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter that takes these high-resolution images so we can zoom in on the face and see if it really is a face. Well, if you take that same idea and do it to the Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, if you zoom to it closely to her nose or her mouth, you're just going to see swirls of brush strokes. You're not going to see any mouth. And what we're seeing in these high-resolution pictures of the face on Mars is that, this new capability of zooming in and actually seeing the texture of the lip and the nose and the eye. You're seeing rock because that's what it's constructed out of. At this point, we really don't know what the material is. We can just tell by what we're looking at the surface features. And Bill having his background in geology, we can only guess about what it's made of. We haven't seen any color pictures, which we'd love to see. We've only seen false color pictures that the European Space Agency has provided, although the camera is capable of taking color pictures, which would give us a better idea of what some of these materials are that we're looking at. But as far as we have seen, they've only released false color images.
If I could add, we're talking about examples that many people might be familiar with. One of the very first poster images that came out made up a single image made up of many smaller images, and that was of Marilyn Monroe. And the portrait was made up of numerous very, very small images of Marilyn Monroe in different pictures throughout her career. But if you stand back, then the entire collection of all these small images makes a giant image of Marilyn Monroe. If you can take that idea and instead of the complete picture of Marilyn Monroe, have a half picture of Marilyn Monroe, and instead of all the small pictures of Marilyn Monroe being bisymmetrical, there are only half images of Marilyn Monroe as well, and in not being north-south oriented, but being oriented in all different directions. That would be a close analogy of what we're seeing in these structures on Mars.
You know what, guys? You mentioned just before that you've had, I can get the impression that you've had issues with NASA deciding what photos they want to release, and at that, not releasing any color photos, even though it's quite capable of taking color photos. Have you come across any kind of resistance or issues in the course of your research over the years? Any kind of brick walls that you've run into, blockades, anybody just simply saying, no, you can't have that, even if you ask for a color photo?
Well, NASA hasn't taken any color photos. It's the European Space Agency, the Mars Express, that has taken the color pictures. As for NASA taking pictures and not letting us see them, they have a propensity to hold images back longer than they're supposed to. The agreement they have with Mike Malin, who ran the Mars Global Surveyor camera, was they had a timeline of about 6 months. He was supposed to release these images. Some of the images he's held back for over a year or two. We just had a problem with the book was just released in September, and the book was locked up and sealed, being in the printing process, I think, back in March. And NASA this summer just released the third image of a controversial parrot image that we've been working on, and we dedicate a whole chapter in our new book to this parrot formation. And NASA decides to release a picture that they took back in 2005, 4 years ago. It was just released this summer after our book was being printed, and it would have been great to have this new image in the book. But this new image is the highest resolution picture they have taken of this parrot formation, which, like the previous first two images, this new image also verifies all of the parrot features, which we were pretty amazed to see this image, but it would have been nice if they had released it back in 2005.
Yeah, it was pretty clever of them to release it after you already had the book in publication. And,
well, it was even more, Rick, it was even more clever than that. Bill and I were on Coast to Coast in 2005 on August 22nd. If you, all listeners out there want to go Google Coast to Coast, we were on with George Norrie on August 22nd, 2005. That same day we were on Coast to Coast, Michael Malin put up an image from 2002 on his Image of the Day segment of his website of Will's the parrot formation, which was like we figured hats off to us that we were onto something with that formation. And
Right.
this summer, when they released the third image of the Parrot Formation, it was released. Are you sitting down? Are you ready? They released the image on August 22nd.
Okay.
Oh man.
So I don't know if this is a ritual time period or what, but it appears to Bill and I that they know we're onto something, and this is maybe just a silent way of saying, nice work.
Right. What do you get out of this resistance that the United States space organizations have, and more specifically NASA, towards getting these photos out to the public? I mean, they say they're only supposed to hold them for 6 months, and here they are releasing them from 4 years ago. And
well, most of the images are available. I mean, everything we have in our books are readily available on the NASA websites. I mean, they have close to 500,000 images just from the Mars Global Surveyor. So really, they're not, in a sense, they're not really hiding anything. Everything is just hidden in plain sight, like we're finding these structures on Mars. You may look at a Mars Global Surveyor strip and say, George, I don't see anything here. And then Bill will point to the upper left corner and say, well, don't you see that picture of God El from the Mesoamerican Popol Vuh right there? And we'll show you a picture in the Popol Vuh that looks just like the image that we're seeing on Mars. And you'll go, wow, I see it now. But, once we show you where it is, it's there. And so NASA really doesn't have to hide anything. Your general public, when they look at these formations and these structures on Mars, they're just looking at the geology, and a lot of researchers are just looking for evidence of water. They're not looking at any type of possible artwork.
well, I know. I mean, that's all nice and wonderful and happy, but the fact of the matter is, they don't seem to be in the spirit of science, in the spirit of the adventure, like the way it's supposed to be. They don't seem anywhere near as enthusiastic as you guys are, or I am, or any other average person who's reading your books. We're all excited, and NASA's acting like they're 2 inches away from death, stone dead, and not reacting in the proper manner in the spirit of the scientific adventure. I don't care about water. If they call themselves scientists, why aren't they excited about what they're seeing in these photographs like you guys are?
That's a good question, and it puzzles us too. I mean, you get into conspiracy theories quite easily when you start wondering, scratching your head, because you would think that something along the lines of what George and I have found would be a boon to NASA, and they would get all this funding to be able to go research this, and they seem to over the years have just gone in the opposite direction, and they want to find the water and the microbes, and they want to look for the bugs instead of the intelligence, and not really sure why, but if you're familiar with Richard Hoagland's work, he has demonstrated a very strong connection with Masonic symbolism and how NASA is being run. And of course, people who have read our first book are familiar with the fact that we have found just very close to the face a half of a compass and square that shows up quite prominently between other structures that also have earthly connections.
Well,
Yeah.
gentlemen,
So,
let's go into the whole thing here with the structures that you guys have been touching on. Why would a civilization want to create these giant artificial structures?
yeah, well, that is also another puzzling thing. You can throw out all kinds of different theories. As we say in the beginning of this Sidonia Codex, in the Maya Quiche Maya Bible, Popol Vuh, it says the original book was written long ago, but is hidden from the searcher and the thinker. And we think that this may be the original book. But why it's hidden, we don't know. But if you remember the god, or the what would you call it, Pharaoh of Egypt way back when, was known as Amun-Ra, and that translates to hidden sun. And at one point he was Ra, and suddenly he became Amun-Ra. He went from the sun to the hidden sun. So there's a definite connection, overlap in symbolism with Mesoamerica and Egypt. It's just unbelievable to me that academia can say there was no connection between the two cultures when there's abundant. Your cup runneth over when you study their cultures. So I don't know. It's strange. It's a head scratcher, and I'll let George add his comments.
Yeah, well, that's what Bill and I came to conclude after finding all these structures and seeing that they had these direct correlations with the iconography and different motifs that we found in Mesoamerican art, that there must be some connection to the Maya culture, obviously, if we're finding all this iconography that matches. And this whole idea of the Popol Vuh being a hidden book, you know, may work out nicely with this scenario, but, you know, we can just speculate about why they were put there. In the last chapter of our first book, we speculate about, you know, why these structures were put there, and there's another connection that we make, that possibly the Olmec were connected with the ancient Anunnaki, which Zechariah Sitchin talks about, you know, going to the underworld, the lower world, or possibly Mesoamerica. So possibly there's some link with this whole Anunnaki culture. And, you know, looking to their mythologies, you know, they talk about the exiling of Marduk onto, you know, the planet that they considered Mars. And, you know, he was sent there in exile. And, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to connect the dots and figure that maybe when Marduk was on Mars, you know, of course he had the problems with his father because he was firstborn, but he wasn't the firstborn by a sister. So he wasn't able to become the next, in line for the next lineage to be the king. It was his brother Mingasada. So, of course, you know, there was all these family problems, and he, of course, was the troublemaker, and Marduk was exiled to Mars. And possibly as an act of blasphemy against his father, he might have constructed all these hidden images about the history of man, you know, the creation mythology in these images that we're finding. And that possibly may be how they got there.
You know,
so that just ties a whole other, you know, string together here.
Right.
So as you can see, it's very difficult for CNN to come on the news and say that they found these structures on Mars and spend 3 weeks explaining to the public what they all mean and the composite images, and it's all. I mean, how many people do you know that know anything about Peruvian art? I mean, Peruvian art is very complex. It's this composite art. It's very difficult to interpret. You know, scholars are still writing books about this Peruvian composite type art that they have down there, and it's also related to the idea of this two-faced and half images that we're finding in Mesoamerican art. It's very complicated stuff, and it would be very difficult, I think, for any government to go on television and say that, you know, we found structures on Mars and they seem to be connected to the Mesoamerican culture, and, you know, then you have Spain and you have Russia saying, well, how come it doesn't reflect our culture? You know, and then you got terrorist bombers blowing up City Hall and all these. It just would get out of control. It's a crazy world.
Yeah, it's understandable. With
when we have discussions, Rick, with people at some of the conferences and things we go to, they find it very difficult to accept that we're finding all these things that deal with Mesoamerican art. Most people that even would be interested in possibly this subject, they have a lot of preconceived notions of their own. And, you know, when people think of finding ruins on another planet, most people think of, you know, Greek buildings and structures, you know, in ruin, because that's what we see here on Earth. It's hard for them to project, you know, with a clear mind what they would find on another planet. I mean, NASA,
our culture.
Even NASA from the beginning said that if we found a face on another planet, it would be symmetrical, which is a Western idea. Totally, you know, like you said, Rick, they're supposed to be scientists, but they totally disregard all of Western art. So if we find sculpture on another, if we find sculpture on another planet, it's going to be a European model, a Western model. Which,
Well,
I mean, that's not scientific. You're already setting up, you know, parameters.
That's the same thing with anthropology, same mentality. And it wasn't until the Lucy skeleton was found, it basically blew the preconceived notion that you were supposed to find an ape walking on knuckles with a large cranium before it could walk upright. Well, sure enough, they find one with a small cranium that was already walking straight. And this destroyed the preconceived notions of some of the Darwinists and evolutionists who walked into it with a subjective attitude like what you're describing. And it was very hard for them to accept that Lucy skeleton, but then all of a sudden other evidence comes along after that supporting that, yes, you don't measure intelligence by the size of your brain. And then shortly after that, it was also realized, hey, with regard to Mesoamerican cultures, you also cannot base intelligence on whether or not a particular culture practiced cannibalism. It doesn't go hand in hand with each other. You can be highly sophisticated and also be engaging in virgin sacrifice or blood worship or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I perfectly understand what you're talking about there. But in relation to what you've brought up so far between the two of you, with everything I've read and learned about over the years, and George, you probably know more about what I'm referring to, but still, I've come to my own conclusions about things, but I want to ask you guys, because I really want your answer. Do you think that the Mayans are connected to these structures on Mars in terms of actually building them? Do you think there's a heritage there? And is there a connection with regard to the Sidonia Plateau to this stuff that's being referred to as enigmatic material? What exactly is enigmatic about it?
Bill?
Oh, yeah, he had asked you, but that's fine. Starting with your last question here about enigmatic, if people are familiar with Zacharias Sitchin's work, he showed images from Mesoamerica of what looked like sketches of helmeted beings with laser guns or something, and he interpreted that to possibly be lasers that could melt rock. It's possible that structures were made out of rock, but then perhaps melted to create a more glass-like finish or surface on them. And as far as the Maya building them, all I can say to that is the pyramids are probably built by slave labor and designed by a highly intelligent engineer or somebody with highly skilled engineering knowledge and abilities. And so it's possible that slave labor was used to build these structures as well. If you go back to Sitchin again, he quotes Sumerian texts. And one quote grabbed me in particular, that when the Anunnaki came to this planet, 300 were, if I get this correct, 300 were left in space and 600 were transported to Earth, or it could be the other way around, I forget exactly. But and then the ones that were left in space actually populated the way station on Mars. So it could have been them that built these structures, but these structures are so incredibly complex that the engineering that went into them had to be somebody who was extremely, extremely intelligent.
With what you've explained, it brings up another question. The half faces and the duplication or mirroring. Okay, I understand and appreciate the significance of the bifurcated faces, but is there also a deeper meaning to be found by doing the duplication process, one half then the other, creating two completely distinct whole faces unto themselves. Is there a deeper meaning to be found in that? And the reason I'm asking is because you just brought up the subject of slavery, slave labor, and it immediately made me think of something similar, such as, let's say, the Russian mafia. So if you know their history is to wear their entire history on their skin with markings and tattoos and writing, so that everything's out in the open, everything's honest, you're not hiding anything. In keeping with that idea, you know, these half faces that are hidden through and then revealed through duplication, is it fair to consider that maybe these are the faces or markings left behind by those who built the structures, in the same way as, let's say, you know, like I said, you know, Russian history and where the Russian mafia comes from with regard to the history of tattooing their skin and the symbolism behind that. Almost like telling your history, leaving your mark behind. This is who I am. This is who we were. Please don't forget us.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Rick. Mars is just a physical body that's been tattooed with these formations and structures that tell a story. And this is a creation mythology. You know, even in our new book, we have a lot of the structures that we're discussing and trying to figure out that we're finding in these NASA photographs that are verbatim right out of the Maya Popol Vuh and the creation mythologies in these stories. And it's very similar to what you're talking about with these full-body tattoos and having all this symbolism. And again, these things are in broad daylight. And I'm sure if you were to examine one of these Russian mafia that you talk of that have these tattoos all over their bodies with these symbols and things, it would probably be a little confusing at first because you wouldn't know where to look and how to figure out what the symbols meant. But once you had the key of knowing what you're looking at, you'd probably be able to figure out what all these symbols on this person's body meant. And that's the same problem we're having with these structures on Mars. They're really not hidden, and possibly the people that put them there figured that, oh, these are going to be easy to see. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But
right.
Considering how old they are and some of the erosion, which interestingly, some of these structures we're finding seem to be pristine, but some of them do seem to be weathered and older than others, or just had the opportunity to be worn more than other parts of the planet. That the original
and just on that thought, George mentioned the half face in Peru, the corral face, which is 4,500 or 5,000 years old. There is also in the Cydonia area an image, a half image, I should say, of Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec god, as we see him depicted in Aztec work, in Aztec art. What, George, 500-600 years ago?
Yeah. So, and that was another image found by Bill. Initially, we thought it resembled a Viking, but we also find that some of the Olmec and Aztec figures and artwork do look very much like their your traditional Viking imagery. So, again, like we were talking about earlier, where there's a lot of these mythological stories that parallel with Egypt and the Maya, it seems to be a universal story that we're finding, and this story just seems to be more preserved in the Mesoamerican culture as opposed to other cultures. You know, it's like the old school experiment, you know, where you play telephone, the little girl in the front row gets the message and it goes around the room, and by the time it gets to the end, it's a little distorted. That's
right.
The same way we're seeing a lot of these mythologies throughout the world. There are a lot of them, like what we've been studying here, looking at the Mesoamerican mythologies that we're reading in the Popol Vuh and some of the Aztec and Maya interpretations of those stories, that we're seeing very similar ideas in Egyptian art and Egyptian mythologies.
Well, gentlemen, I wanted to ask you a question about one of your latest discoveries. I was able to see the photo of the monkey image that you guys had found on there. Can you kind of go into that a little bit for us about that image?
Which monkey?
I think she's referring to the howler monkey.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
The howler monkey was another candidate to go in the new book, but we just couldn't fit everything in there, so that one's basically on the website. And the howler monkey is one of the most prominent Mesoamerican symbols that we found. That's in the Popol Vuh, and it's in a lot of the codexes that they use. And it's from what they call God Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, a lot of the Mesoamerican scholars and researchers just started giving letters to some of the gods. Like the god of the underworld was god El. And before they knew what their names were, before they could actually read what the Maya texts were saying, the names of these gods. So traditionally, the howler monkey glyph is referred to as God Sea.
Okay. Rick, I know you had a couple of questions.
About the howler monkey? The image is pretty startling. We compare it to an Olmec hache, which is one of those structures that used to stick in the ball courts. It's like a hatchet, but it's a profiled face in the shape of a hatchet, and the facial similarities are pretty striking. What was your question, Rick?
Yeah, since you brought it up about the monkey, I've been directing people to your website all night long in the chat room here, and where on the website could they find those images?
Excuse me?
Where on
our website? Yeah, if they go to the SidoniaInstitute.com,
right.
They just go to when they go to the main page, there's a file up there. It says Home, News, Articles. If they just click on Articles, and then open up Articles, and we have a whole list of articles there, going back to 1998. The newest article put up this year, actually beginning of the year, back in February, is the howler monkey.
Yeah, this image is outstanding. I'm looking at it right now, and I'm going to put the link directly into the chat room for people to find, too. Very interesting. Well, I'm curious. I understand the significance of Mesoamerican cultures. Very sophisticated, very powerful and expanding, but still it's interesting to know why the Mesoamericans. There were a lot of other civilizations on Earth at that early time, so can you surmise, or do you have a reason why maybe Mesoamerica has such a close tie, obviously a close tie, to the Sidonia Codex?
Well, going back to the, we're just trying to look at earthbound history that we can refer to, because the only way we're really going to know is to go to Mars, which doesn't seem the way NASA is moving towards Mars. We're probably not going to get there in our lifetime. But from looking at, world histories and written text, and going back to Zechariah Sitchin's interpretation of some of these ancient Sumerian texts, which mention the Anunnaki going down to what he interprets as the South America, which were the black-headed people. Supposedly, the Anunnaki built all the races of the human race. You have the brown people, the red people, the white, and the blacks. The black-headed people were their favorites, and they're the ones they took down to South America to set up an outpost down there. I guess they were searching for more gold, and because of their close relationship with the this Negroid race, which became the Olmec down in Mesoamerica, they were bestowed this sacred information. We're assuming that may be the only link. How come they have all this knowledge about this artwork that we're finding on Mars? And the other interesting thing about this connection with the Olmec in Mesoamerica is that there's a little-known city in Mesoamerica called Naranjo, which we mentioned in the first book. And Naranjo plays a very strategic part in the story, which is connection with Mars. And if we assume that Ningasada brought this culture down to South America and nurtured them and gave them knowledge of science and everything and gave them a history, he would give them a history that was generated through the Anunnaki, which we're finding on Mars. So basically, we're thinking, which Bill is still, trying to get a handle on this idea also, is that possibly Mingasata bestowed this information to the Olmec. And of course, the Olmec is the mother culture of Mesoamerica, which all of the Aztec and the Maya took all of their mythologies and everything right off of the Olmec and basically just copied everything. And just a couple of years ago, there's more and more research found every day down in Mesoamerica that substantiates this theory that all of the Maya and Aztec mythologies and artwork came right out of the Olmec. So if you look back to the oldest culture of Mesoamerica, you find that these cultures were producing similar art that we just happen to be finding on Mars. And the city of Naranjo, their patron god was the Zip monster. And the Zip monster is, again, another symbol for Mars. And they had, there's all these texts, and there's a couple Maya researchers that have been interpreting these hieroglyphics and things that are written on the stela and things down in Naranjo. And amazingly, just as amazing we see with the writings of the Sumerians talking about all these ancient histories about the Anunnaki coming to the moon and to Mars and all these crazy stories, which scholars at one time just thought this was all mythology, that we see this mythology in Mesoamerica talking about this Star Wars, nothing to do with the movie, but they had a war with this planet that was connected to Mars, and this planet was also called Sixth Earth Place, which was like another planet that was like Earth, and that's how they titled it, Sixth Earth Place. The Maya numbered their planets just like the Sumerians. The Sumerians numbered their planets from the outside in. Earth would be the number 7, Venus was number 8, Mars was number 6, and the Maya had the same numbering system. They considered the Earth to be the number 7, the equivalent of the number 7. Venus is always shown as an 8-pointed star, or sometimes it's a 8-pointed star that's cut in half. Again, the whole idea of cutting things in half. And Mars is considered 6. There's a lot of Zip monsters that have 6 dots on its body. You know, again, the reference to 6. We discussed this in the first book. And they called this planet Sixth Earth Place, and it was also related to the Zip monster. It was also another marker meaning Mars. So right in this text that we're reading in Naranjo talks about this war with some other group, and of course the Anunnaki were having wars with all these other people, which were not clear about who they were. So again, we have this story repeated where there's some type of conflict going on with this Martian planet, and an outpost is right there in Mesoamerica. It would be in Naranjo. So it's pretty interesting to find all of these connections, which lead this road right back to Mars and Mesoamerica.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen. Well, we're going to take a quick break, quick 4-minute break, and when we come back, I'd love to talk to the guys about the chapter called The Key. And if you guys want to call in and talk to William or George, the call-in number is 347-857-1104. That's 347-857-1104. And we'll be right back on Other World Radio. Okay, guys.
I'm here.
It looks like the switchboard is down. Hold on just for a second there. There's something going on. We're having some technical problems, and it looks like our signal's being jammed. Hold on just for a second.
NASA's after us.
I do apologize, callers. And I do apologize, listeners, if you can hear us out there. We're not streaming right now.
Are we off the air?
I think we're still in the air there. I'm trying to get the switchboard back up. I don't know if we're streaming or not at this point. Rick, are you there? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I don't see any warnings on the switchboard at all.
Okay, on my end, I'm jammed. It's just keeping on rolling over, guys. Let's just go into it, and we'll do an audio cut on this. And George, if you would, let's go ahead and talk about the chapter that you call the key.
The key is a structure that was initially looked at early on by Dr. Mark Berlato. And he was the one that actually called the structure the key. Richard Hoagland had given names to some of the features in the Sidonia area. Petro and Molinare, of course, the D&M pyramids named after them. So we didn't call this the key. This was, you know, trying to keep a sense of history and everything. We, anytime we talk about some of the structures in the Sidonia area or any other part of the planet, we try to, you know, stay with the accepted names that were given to these features.
Mm-hmm. Not by NASA.
Excuse me?
I said not by NASA.
Right. Yeah.
The names that were given
really,
to these
NASA really hasn't titled anything because they're not interested in any of the mesas or anything. They're always looking for water. They've been looking for water for the last 40 years. And they just basically keep telling us that, yes, NASA, they come out and say that Mars at one time had water. And here's more evidence that it one time had water. So,
okay.
The key is located in Sidonia. It's on the, I guess it's the eastern side from the face. And it's right next to, just below a strange a flat tabletop-like mesa. And Bill, with his geological background, can give you a little synopsis about what we're looking at here, because this is a just if you don't even want to talk about bifurcated faces or composite images or Mesoamerican art, just as a geological feature, this really raises a lot of eyebrows, I would think, because you have these two formations. They're almost touching. They're in a flat plain area. One mesa is completely flat, and it almost has like a charred piece of pottery look to it. And it's sitting right next to another formation that has, you know, some of the most complex topographical features that you can see on Mars. And they're right next to each other. And it's like, how the heck did these two formations form next to each other? Isn't that what you would say, Bill?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you take a look at any area on Earth. You take the Rocky Mountains or the Sierra Nevadas or any mountain range or any area, geologic area, and all the you can see a similarity in deposition and erosion and features, and everything looks quite similar. Here you have two mesas roughly the same size and strange non-symmetrical shapes to them. And as George says, one's completely flat and one has all kinds of topographic relief to it, and that shouldn't be the case. They should both be exposed to the same elements and therefore should have similar erosional features. It doesn't matter if you're looking at because one is north of the other and one is south of the other or anything else. They should be at least slightly similar, and they are not at all.
And Dr. Mark Berlato called this the key because in the early Viking image, which was, of course, the poor early Viking images, this kind of looked like a key formation that was on top of this mesa. If you look at the old, we have it mentioned in the book here, if it does look a little bit like a key formation with a hole on one end and, you know, maybe within a lock or something. So that's basically why he called it the key. I had acquired through Mark Berlato requested that he send me some of the enhancements that he did of this formation, and we really couldn't make any decision early on. Bill and I had looked at this. I had done some preliminary work. Right from the beginning, I noticed that the left side looked like a sagging mask with skin just hanging on it, very, frightening looking, almost like it was a shrunken head or something that had this sagging skin all over it. And I immediately noticed that the right side kind of looked like an owl, had a big eye and the little feathering at the top. Just generally, that's what it looked like. And I had no idea how these two were even connected. And Bill and I, we didn't put this in our first book because we just didn't have sufficient images to make an analysis of this. And we didn't get any new images until our first book came out in 2005, and we didn't get any new images of the key until 2002, and those were the Themis images. Do you remember those, Bill?
Yes.
Yeah, the Themis took a much better picture of this formation, and still, Bill and I weren't happy because it was still a little subjective for what we were looking at. The new Themis image, confirmed from my standpoint that we were still seeing these two types of faces on there, but it just wasn't of the caliber to put into a book. And luckily, back in 2008, NASA took, with the new high-resolution, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, they took these beautiful pictures. Actually, they took 2 or 3 of them of this key formation. And it was with these new images that we were able to verify that this sagging skin-type flayed face that I had observed was actually there. And you can actually see, which we have mentioned in the book, you can see the duplicated image of the flayed face, which you can actually see the eyes hanging under the slits of the skin. And we found that the Maya actually did this. They would go into battle and they would defeat the enemy and bring their prisoners back, and they'd flay their bodies and hang the skins on top of themselves. They'd actually sometimes wear the whole skin. And they did this as a ritual to empower themselves with the power of their enemies. And so we show these 2 different images in the book here, in the new book. And we also show some comparisons of similar Mayan, Aztec, and ancient cultures of the Mesoamerican area that use these flayed faces, just to show a comparison of what we're looking at. And the owl side in the new Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter really had a lot of detail, and it looked like this big-eyed owl looking at you, possibly with its beak open, and it also had these the little feathers at the top of the head. And I found this image of an Olmec drawing that was deep in a cave. The owls live in the cave. They're part of the underworld. And that's what we found through the research, that the owl is a symbol of the underworld. Going back, I think earlier we spoke about God El of the underworld. One of his companions was the owl. And so within this cave there's this beautiful drawing of an owl, and of course we show a comparison in the book. And one of our fellow researchers early on another website that I had visited and did some research, one of the people that I was doing some of the studies there with had done another duplication. Basically what we found with the flayed face and the owl was basically splitting the mesa right down the middle. It was just like we had done with the face on Mars and some of the other formations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right, so this was, nothing fancy. It was just right down the middle. Everything we were finding seemed to be right down the middle. And this other researcher, he noticed that there was this other face in this old Venus image of a mask that had the 4 eyes. Bill had found this also. And we noticed that, again, with this Mesoamerican iconography, there's the yellow smoking god of the underworld has 4 eyes. So this is the god with 4 eyes. And on the opposite side, so now we have 4 different faces. The 4th one is actually an image of a feline. It's which was at one time called the Lion King. So we're finding 4 different faces on this key formation. We're finding a lion, the flayed head, the owl, and this face with the 4 eyes. And interestingly, all of these characters are intimately related with the god of the underworld. The owl and the jaguar, or this lion, feline face with this crown, they're both characters that are in the underworld with God El. Of course, the owl, and you've got the lion of the underworld. And at times, he would have 4 eyes because he could see in the 4 directions. So a lot, these gods were very complicated. They had dual aspects, and then some of them were what they called had 4 aspects, because they would go into the underworld, and then in the underworld they would also have different aspects. So it got very complicated. So in short, basically all of these facial features we were finding within this one mesa were all intimately connected with each other as symbols of these characters in the underworld.
With everything that we've been mentioning throughout the show and the questions and answers, and if this can go for either of you, can feel free to answer this. Is it fair to say that in all your research that there are definitely artificial structures on Mars? And I'm asking this based on not just your research, but what I've heard Richard Hoagland talk about, what I've heard Andrew Passaggio talk about, as well as several others. What is your feeling on that? Do artificial structures exist? And if so, what's the big deal with talking about them?
I guess I'll start, Bill. Are you still awake, Bill?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, we believe there's overwhelming evidence that there's artificial structures on the surface. Just the fact that Bill and I have compiled, we have 2 books now full of dozens of examples of these geoglyphs that appear to have this connection with the Mesoamerican iconography. Just on that fact alone, I think should raise some eyebrows about the existence of these formations on the planet. And, we invite the listeners to, take a look at these structures. You can go to our website. You don't have to purchase our books. We have a lot of information right on the website. And I'm sure just by looking at the dozen or so articles we have on our website, it goes way beyond any kind of coincidence that these features would be not artificial. The argument that you can find, faces in rocks and, the old man in the mountain, the detail that we're seeing in a lot of these formations go well beyond just generic formations. There's detail, and we're not only finding, facial structures, and we're finding these parrot formations. Getting back to the parrot, the parrot, we sent that image off to 3 different veterinarians, and they found 18 points of anatomical correctness. That goes way beyond any kind of,
wow,
clouds in the sky or, ripples in the sand. These are intentionally designed features.
Yeah, you don't need a degree in statistics to realize that you can have a coincidence of 2 or maybe 3 things, but not only are these structures all related to the Mesoamerican mythology, which in itself is beyond statistical chance, the motif is the same, and within the structures there is well, just take the face on Mars. You have the bifurcated aspect of it. You have the bifurcated aspect, the same motif in Mesoamerican culture. In the first temple in Syros, as we show in the first book, you have the masks on the temple, and the humanoid side, I think we had 5 or 6 different points of comparison, and the same on the feline side. That was in itself goes beyond statistical chance, and then it goes on and on. As I said, you don't need a degree in statistics. All you need is a bit of common sense.
Yeah, you know what? This brings up an interesting difference, though. Before, when I was asking you both about the photographs being released in a timely manner and conveniently not being released, just as you're publishing your book, the idea behind that is that they're hiding in plain sight. And okay, fine. But here we have a different scenario, something that's not hiding in plain sight and should be talked about by everyone, including our official grand masters within the space agencies. And that being these artificial structures on what's been found not just on Mars, but also the Moon as well. And so, I mean, you know, it's not like everyone has access to, say, you know, to it as opposed to photographs. So why aren't these artificial structures being spoken about? Why aren't they being taught in, you know, grade school history class at this point, since obviously they've been known about since the 1970s? What would your take on that be? How do you feel about that?
Well, if I could comment, as we said earlier in the show, it's a head scratcher because it seems that NASA is going out of their way to discredit anybody who insinuates that there is intelligent design on Mars. And the media, of course, plays a major role in what the public thinks. Because we have the newscasts on our evening news and we have the newspapers, and that's what forms people's opinion. If it was real, it would be on the 11 o'clock news or the 6 o'clock news or whatever. However,
right.
If you look at the 11 o'clock news and the 6 o'clock news or whatever over the years, when anything is brought up that has to do with extraterrestrial intelligence, you get this you know, talking out of the side of the mouth and the snickering and the little green men mentality in the news media. Any story that has to do with UFOs or anything like that always ends, the newscast always ends with the anchors laughing or smiling.
Yes, that's definitely true, yes, I know.
So,
Okay.
so there's this mentality that if you take anything like this seriously, then you belong to the tinfoil hat crowd.
Okay.
Well, you know, when NASA took the new image of the face on Mars, I mean, even back in 1998, they released what has famously become known as the cat box image. I mean, it was the raw data that was all distorted and elongated, and that's the image that was published in I think the New York Times and a couple other papers. Not many papers even published it because they thought it was a joke. And I can remember watching CNN. They were gleeful to put the picture up and say, this is what, you know, some people thought was the face on Mars, and they're like Bill said, they're snickering. And that was
Michael Malin produced some coffee mugs with the picture of the face on it saying, "In your face," directed to Richard Hoagland, I'm sure.
Right.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that was, you know, this is supposed to all be over now. Let's, you know, get on and talk about something else. It was all over. And NASA released the rectified image, the correct image, quietly the next day on their website. Now, Rick and Sandra, this is 1998 when this happened. I mean, not many people had computers or access to the Internet. So the only way you could actually view the rectified true image that NASA had taken of the face on Mars, besides what we call the cat box image, you'd have to have access to the Internet. And by that time, nobody was even paying attention. And for over a year, when any newspaper or magazine, for some reason, had to mention the face on Mars, they would put up the cat box image. And when NASA, I was interviewed in the paper when our book came out in 2005, a local newspaper in New Jersey, I think it was the Asbury Park Press. NASA sent them the cat box image when they requested an image for the face on Mars.
Oh, God.
Oh, wow.
So this is 2005.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
this is what they do. And, you know, they do nothing publicly but try to discourage any type of research in this. When Bill and I were working, we've been working for over 5 years on this Paratopia paper. We're trying to get, we have it published in our new book, the Martian Codex, but we're also trying to get this done in a legitimate format, in academic journal. We're trying to get this published in some type of geological journal or something. We've been submitting it for the last couple of years. We've sent proposals to 3 different journals. One journal initially over in Britain, they had looked at the object and the paper we sent them, but we didn't get published there. We sent a proposal to the Mars Journal here in the United States, and it was sent back to me without them even looking at it. I sent them initially a letter explaining what we had, an introduction letter, and they denied even to us to submit the image. And this is a formation that we had 3 veterinarians look at, one in Ohio, an avian specialist who herself has over 20 papers published about birds. She's an avian specialist. She's nationally known and renowned. We have a veterinarian in New Jersey and one in Virginia that, were very gracious to do an analysis for us, and they found 18 points of anatomical correctness. And this is a formation. I sent these images to some of the geologists throughout the country, and they don't even want to look at it. So, I mean, this is science. And, we can put aside the face on Mars, because it's a bifurcated, and it's very complicated for people to understand, about the tri-leaf symbol and the nose ornament that's hiding the nose. I mean, people's eyes start to twitch when you start talking about these connections. But to look at this parrot formation, you don't have to have any explanation for what a parrot is. Everybody knows what a parrot looks like. Mm-hmm. And when they look at this parrot formation, I mean, their mouths drop. I mean, it's like, that's on Mars? And then they immediately look away because they don't want to look at it because now it's on Mars. That can't be real.
Right. Exactly. Well, guys, we have a couple more email questions for you from Roberto in Italy. He says, gentlemen, do you think that there is currently life on Mars?
I think that there is. I think it's underground. And to what extent it is, I don't know if it's remnants of the civilization that was originally based on Mars in terms of the way station for the Anunnaki, or if it's something that has evolved from that, or exactly what it is. But judging from what we have found in terms of the glyphs and whatnot, as I said earlier in the show, we have an example of the iconography of the Aztecs as they what's the word I'm looking for? As they projected their image of Quetzalcoatl 500-600 years ago, and so if you look at what we have found spanning Earth history of thousands of years up till 500 years ago, and we've only looked at just a tiny fraction of the surface of Mars in these pictures. I would have to think, yeah, why not? Because Mars hasn't been capable of surface life for a long time. So any life on Mars would have to be underground, where water would be liquid, and you would have the warmth and an artificial atmosphere to create. And let's look at the aspect of space travel. If you had the technology that these people had 5,000 years ago, why would you not still be present?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, gentlemen, how long did it take you to write the book, The Martian Codex?
It was about 3 years in the making, and then the publisher called and told us that our first book was sold out, and that we had another book in the works. And I called Bill, and because we had been quietly working on some of these things. We have enough information for another book, actually. But once they told us that they wanted to do a second book, we spent like a year putting this all together. But overall, it was about 3 years of writing and putting this stuff together. Bill and I may seem cordial here on the air, but we have knockout, drag-out fights in the background. So I'll say, I think it looks like this. He goes, no way, you're an idiot. This is not that, it's this. And so a lot of things we have sitting in the burner. We haven't really decided what we can actually go public and say what it is.
It's hard to communicate via the internet as opposed to sitting side by side and saying, well, can't you see this and can't you see that, and that sort of thing. But also, George, you need to mention that a lot of this, our second book, was discoveries made by other researchers who could see something anomalous, but they didn't know exactly what they were looking at. And George put a lot of this stuff together by people communicating on the website and saying, well, this is what I found. And George would go into his Mesoamerican books and make a connection and write a few notes down. And so George had developed a base for this book over the years. And then, as he said, we had to scramble and put it together because the publisher wanted to put something out in short order. So.
Okay.
But the first book was, what, George? It was 7 years before it was published, and a lot of the stuff was discovered quickly, but it took a number of years to put it all together.
Yeah, when him and I first met, we actually wrote our first book and the second book through emails. When Bill and I wrote the first book, I didn't even know what kind of music he liked. I didn't even know what he looked like. When we met at Gaithersburg at the X conference with Stephen Bassett put on an X conference, we were at the first X conference, and Bill flew in, and we didn't even think to tell each other what we looked like. He's standing at the desk signing in, and he's looking around, and I went up to the desk and I said, has Bill Saunders checked in yet? And there he was. We wrote the book and didn't even, we didn't inquire about any personal stuff. We just were down to business getting the book done, and it was amazing.
Well, we have one last question, guys, from Marie from Germany. She says, when do you think that we'll go back to Mars? When do you think that that'll happen?
Back to Mars?
I'm not sure yet.
Well, that's what she says. That's what she wrote. She says, when do you think that we'll go to Mars? Basically, I think that's what she meant.
Well, I don't know if it has anything to do with, national debt or having money, because I know during the Clinton administration we had supposedly all kinds of money, but nobody wanted to go to Mars. And, now we're living in the worst economy since the Depression, supposedly, so I guess we're not going to Mars now. I don't think we're ever going to Mars, myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Especially what we found up there, and we probably won't be going to the moon either.
Okay. Ricky, you got a couple
the moon's
questions?
Another story. There's stuff up there, too, but that's another story.
Okay. And which we'll be very happy to have you guys back again to talk about the other stuff there. But
yeah, without the technical glitches too. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah. For either Bill or George, I know you have there's something in reference to the D&M pyramid. And the first time I ever heard about the D&M pyramid was through Richard Hoagland. But in your books and so forth, obviously there's a bazillion other geoglyphs and interesting things there, aside from the mathematical accuracy of the D&M pyramid. Do you have any favorites there? Like, so let's say the moon goddess. Would you like to talk about that? And for that matter, why do you think it represents a moon goddess?
Well, this is another structure that someone else, worked on earlier. DePetro and Molinaro discovered the D&M pyramid. Dr. Mark Carlotto did a lot of work on it. We're still waiting for more pictures of the D&M pyramid. The new Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter supposedly is going to take a picture this year. That's what I've heard from Keith Laney. So we're hoping to get that. We have a whole chapter in the new book that's dedicated to the D&M pyramid. And most people in our line of work, they think the D&M pyramid is a 5-sided pyramid, and it looks like the Pentagon, and that's it. However, Bill and I, we seem to look at things a little differently. And
right.
Most of the discoveries that were made in the D&M pyramid were all made by Bill independently, and he was finding all these two basic images in the D&M pyramid, again, early on, and had no idea that they had any connection to Mesoamerica. And Bill can tell you about that.
Yeah.
Are you still there?
as I said earlier, these structures, perspective is a major feature of them, and as you zoom in or zoom out, they change in terms of what is presented. The DNM pyramid is a classic of this, because in 1976 Viking orbiter images, it definitely looked like a five-sided pyramid. However, in the 1998 images from the Mars Global Surveyor craft, you could see that it was not a five-sided pyramid. It definitely has five faces to it, five sides to it. But you can tell that it never was at any time a five-sided pyramid. It was intentionally created to look like one at a distance, I think, for a number of reasons. But as you zoom in on it, you can see that there are profiled and bifurcated, or I shouldn't say bifurcated, profiled and half images within the structure. And it does definitely have a connection to the Pentagon in other aspects of it. But I'm going to turn it over to George in terms of the moon goddess connection, the symbolism. But it's a very, very unique structure compared to the other ones around. And one thing that NASA said initially in terms of the face on Mars was that all these mesas around are very similar in appearance, and it's just another mesa. But if you look closely at these structures, none of them look like each other. And if you were to look like a view of the Rocky Mountains from above, they all look very, very similar. That's not the case in Cydonia.
Well, the other interesting thing about the DNM pyramid, all we basically had initially was the Viking image, and then NASA had taken an image in 2002, a Themis image, which really didn't have a lot of resolution. It was basically just capturing the form of the DNM. Again, what Bill was talking about, the perspective, and so everything was basically flattened out, so you couldn't see any detail in, as Bill was talking about, the five faces around, which are basically just the sides of the pyramid. So in that new Themis image, we saw just a clear image, more of a clear image from the Viking to the Themis, and that's about as far as it went. So in our first book, there was really nothing there for us to see, so we didn't even include that in the book. And nothing really happened until Malin started to take some higher resolution pictures of the DNM pyramid. But again, NASA has this propensity to take portions of structures that people like Bill and I are interested in. So they took 3 different pictures of the DNM pyramid, but only like the left side. They took the right side. They took a little bit of the corner. So we never got a full image. So Michael Malin snapped into action after taking these little bits and pieces, and he created what is called a composite. And he used 3 different images, and he put it up on his website and proudly displayed it as, showing this is not a pyramid. And he used 3 different images, like I said, different strips to piece this and stitch it together so we could see the full formation of the DNM pyramid. And oddly, he used a very poor low-resolution image that ran down the center. If you go into our book, you can see I do a reconstruction of Michael Malin's image with the 3 different images. And oddly, he runs this very fine strip down the center of the pyramid, exactly where Bill found this profile. And this profile you cannot see in Michael Malin's image because he put this low-resolution strip down the center. And then our good friend Keith Laney, who actually does work for NASA, and he does the handiwork of a lot of the images that some of the viewers out there, or the listeners, if they want to go to the NASA websites and download some of these Mars Global Surveyor images, a lot of them have been enhanced by Keith Laney. He has done some freelance work for NASA, and so he stitched his own image together, and he actually used 2 of the same images. However, for the center strip, he used a better high-resolution image. So that's the image that Bill was talking about that he had found all this information in, because Keith's composite was far superior in detail than what Michael Malin released. And that's the image that basically broke the code of the D&M pyramid, because Bill was actually able to find the old moon goddess and the young moon goddess, which is actually seen in profile. And if you go to our book, you can actually see on the right side of the D&M pyramid, there's this profile of a young, angelic-looking face, and she's got this big headdress that looks like a dog. It's got a tooth coming down in the back, this large canine or tongue seems to be hanging out, which is very odd. And Bill was kind of perplexed when he first saw this about, why. Usually if you see a dog, it has a major canine in the front. This hooded woman has this headdress of a dog, which has the large canine tooth in the back of the mouth, towards the back of the lip there. And I sent Bill some images of images of these dogs that I found in some of the Maya Codex, particularly the Madrid Codex, which has these images of these dogs of the underworld, which have these large canines in the back of the. So again, that's like an iconographic marker that you find this tooth or this canine feature in the back of the mouth. So again, we were having a connection with Mesoamerican culture, and of course the feline, or not the feline, the dog or the coyote is related to the moon goddess, because the dog's always howling at the moon. And I found some images in one of the, I think the Dresden Codex, that had the moon goddess sitting there with a dog, and he's howling at the moon because she's the moon goddess. And so we have this other image, which Bill did the duplication of the main moon goddess, where she has this large, elaborate dress. And that's a representation of the old moon goddess, who in Mesoamerican iconography wore this long dress, and her breasts are exposed. And Bill saw that this woman that's standing there with her arms stretched out, has her breasts exposed, and she's wearing this long gown. And this is right out of Mesoamerican iconography. And the moon is a waxing and a waning, goes through the different phases of the moon. And the Maya had the same mythology about the old moon goddess and the young moon goddess. One was the waxing phase of the moon, the other one was the waning phase. And not only were those two characters mentioned in Mesoamerican iconography, the interesting thing that Bill saw in the profiled face of the young moon goddess with this dog headdress, that she appeared to have a disfigured eye. Her eye seems to be closed, or it seems to have like a scar tissue over it, which is very odd. Again, in Mesoamerican mythology, we find that the people of the earth were very concerned that the moon at night was too bright, so the god struck out the eye of the moon goddess to make the moon less bright at night, so they could sleep because it was too bright. So we have images of the moon goddess with her eye extracted and this scar tissue over the eye. So all of these oddities that we're seeing, we're finding explanations for in Mesoamerican art, basically. And we go through all of this in the new book about how everything's documented, and why this portrait looks like that, and why the main D&M, the old moon goddess, has her arms outstretched and everything, which is very much like.
Of course, right above it is a perfectly round crater with a crescent in the center of it, which, when you duplicate it, you get the waning and waxing moon, and it appears that the moon goddess is pointing to it.
Yeah, which is kind of odd. And another symbol of the moon is the rabbit in Mesoamerican culture. That was the moon goddess is at many times depicted with a little rabbit sitting on her lap. They had a relationship through the mythology. And right at the tip of the D&M pyramid, we find a portrait of the rabbit. So, I mean, all this iconography is just embedded, repeated, which is pretty amazing.
You know what, guys, I want to give you some time here to tell people. We're coming down to the last 6 minutes of the show here. I know people would like to know how your readers can acquire the new book, The Martian Codex, More Reflections from Mars.
Well, the new book and the first book is available through our publisher, North Atlantic Books. You can also get it on our website if you go to the Cydonia Institute.com. you can go to our book page, and if you send us some information about what you'd like to order, you can send information to the Cydonia Codex, P.O. Box 102, Purcellville, Virginia, 20132. And if you're living in Canada, I guess you can contact my good friend Bill Saunders. You have an address up there, Bill, or is that under lock?
I would suggest they just stick to the Cydonia Institute website for the time being.
Okay, that's wonderful, guys. And thank you very much for telling the audience how to do that. Bill, George, Sandy, and I want to thank you tonight for coming on Otherworld Radio. This has been a fantastic discussion, and I've, for the longest time, been looking forward to talking with you. And Sandy was just as excited about getting to speak with both of you, so thank you very much for being here tonight. It's been a fantastic 2 hours with you. Once again, for our listeners, go check out Bill and George's website at www.thecydoniainstitute.com.
Research. So
and
the
can I also add?
Yes, Bill.
I was just going to say, perspective is a huge thing because these structures are very, very large, and they're more created like mosaics rather than actual sculptures. So if you zoom in too close, you totally lose the perspective altogether. We found so far structures or images, I should say, in the rock from, we'll say, a few hundred meters to many kilometers in size or many miles in size. And so you have to, and some of these images are built within the same structure and sometimes at different angles. So you have to have the proper perspective. That's very important.
Okay.
Well, the perspective, it's like looking at the Mona Lisa from the proper perspective. You can see the face, the smile, the famous Mona Lisa smile. But if you get up too close, a lot of people are putting a lot of stock in this new Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter that takes these high-resolution images so we can zoom in on the face and see if it really is a face. Well, if you take that same idea and do it to the Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, if you zoom to it closely to her nose or her mouth, you're just going to see swirls of brushstrokes. You're not going to see any mouth. And what we're seeing in these high-resolution pictures of the face on Mars is that, this new capability of zooming in and actually seeing the texture of the lip and the nose and the eye. You're seeing rock because that's what it's constructed out of. At this point, we really don't know what the material is. We can just tell by what we're looking at the surface features. And Bill having his background in geology, we can only guess about what it's made of. We haven't seen any color pictures, which we'd love to see. We've only seen false color pictures that the European Space Agency has provided, although the camera is capable of taking color pictures, which would give us a better idea of what some of these materials are that we're looking at. But as far as we have seen, they've only released false color images.
If I could add, we're talking about examples that many people might be familiar with. One of the very first poster images that came out made up a single image made up of many smaller images, and that was Marilyn Monroe. And the portrait was made up of numerous very, very small images of Marilyn Monroe in different pictures throughout her career. But if you stand back, then the entire collection of all these small images makes a giant image of Marilyn Monroe. If you can take that idea and instead of the complete picture of Marilyn Monroe, have a half picture of Marilyn Monroe, and instead of all the small pictures of Marilyn Monroe being bisymmetrical, they're only half images of Marilyn Monroe as well, and in not being north-south oriented, but being oriented in all different directions. That would be a close analogy of what we're seeing in these structures on Mars.
You know what, guys? You mentioned just before that you've had, I get the impression that you've had issues with NASA deciding what photos they want to release, and at that, not releasing any color photos, even though it's quite capable of taking color photos. Have you come across any kind of resistance or issues in the course of your research over the years? Any kind of brick walls that you've run into, blockades, you know, anybody just simply saying, no, you can't have that, even if you ask for a color photo?
Well, NASA hasn't taken any color photos. It's the European Space Agency, the Mars Express, that has taken the color pictures. As for NASA taking pictures and not letting us see them, they have a propensity to hold images back longer than they're supposed to. The agreement they have with Mike Malin, who ran the Mars Global Surveyor camera, was they had a timeline of about 6 months he was supposed to release these images. Some of the images he's held back for over a year or two. We just had a problem with the book was just released in September, and the book was locked up and sealed, being in the printing process, I think, back in March. And NASA this summer just released the third image of a controversial parrot image that we've been working on, and we dedicate a whole chapter in our new book to this parrot formation. And NASA decides to release a picture that they took back in 2005, 4 years ago. It was just released this summer after our book was being printed, and it would have been great to have this new image in the book. But this new image is the highest resolution picture they have taken of this parrot formation, which, like the previous first two images, this new image also verifies all of the parrot features, which we were pretty amazed to see this image, but it would have been nice if they had released it back in 2005.
Yeah, it was pretty clever of them to release it after you already had the book in publication. And,
well, it was even more, Rick, it was even more clever than that. Bill and I were on Coast to Coast in 2005 on August 22nd. If you, all listeners out there want to go Google Coast to Coast, we were on with George Norrie on August 22nd, 2005. That same day we were on Coast to Coast, Michael Malin put up an image from 2002 on his Image of the Day segment of his website of Will's the parrot formation, which was like we figured hats off to us that we were onto something with that formation. And this summer when they released the third image of the parrot formation, it was released. Are you sitting down? Are you ready? They released the image on August 22nd.
Okay.
Oh, man.
So I don't know if this is a ritual time period or what, but it appears to Bill and I that they know we're onto something, and this is maybe just a silent way of saying, nice work.
Right. What do you get out of this resistance that the United States space organizations have, and more specifically NASA, towards getting these photos out to the public? I mean, they say they're only supposed to hold them for 6 months, and here they are releasing them from 4 years ago. And
well, most of the images are available. I mean, everything we have in our books are readily available on the NASA websites. I mean, they have close to 500,000 images just from the Mars Global Surveyor. So really, they're not, in a sense, they're not really hiding anything. Everything is just hidden in plain sight, like we're finding these structures on Mars. You may look at a Mars Global Surveyor strip and say, George, I don't see anything here. And then Bill will point to the upper left corner and say, well, don't you see that picture of God El from the Mesoamerican Popol Vuh right there? And we'll show you a picture in the Popol Vuh that looks just like the image that we're seeing on Mars. And you'll go, wow, I see it now. But, once we show you where it is, it's there. And so NASA really doesn't have to hide anything. Because your general public, when they look at these formations and these structures on Mars, they're just looking at the geology, and a lot of researchers are just looking for evidence of water. They're not looking at any type of possible artwork.
Well, I know. I mean, that's all nice and wonderful and happy, but the fact of the matter is, they don't seem to be in the spirit of science, in the spirit of the adventure, like the way it's supposed to be. They don't seem anywhere near as enthusiastic as you guys are, or I am, or any other average person who's reading your books. We're all excited, and NASA's acting like they're 2 inches away from death, stone dead, and not reacting in the proper manner in the spirit of the scientific adventure. I don't care about water. If they call themselves scientists, why aren't they excited about what they're seeing in these photographs like you guys are?
That's a good question, and it puzzles us too. I mean, you get into conspiracy theories quite easily when you start wondering, scratching your head, because you would think that something along the lines of what George and I have found would be a boon to NASA, and they would get all this funding to be able to go research this, and they seem to over the years have just gone in the opposite direction, and they want to find the water and the microbes, and they want to look for the bugs instead of the intelligence, and not really sure why, but if you're familiar with Richard Hoagland's work, he has demonstrated a very strong connection with Masonic symbolism and how NASA is being run. And of course, people who have read our first book are familiar with the fact that we have found just very close to the face a half of a compass and square that shows up quite prominently between other structures that also have earthly connections.
Well,
yeah,
gentlemen,
so,
let's go into the whole thing here with the structures that you guys have been touching on. Why would a civilization want to create these giant artificial structures?
Yeah, well, that is also another puzzling thing. You can throw out all kinds of different theories. As we say in the beginning of this Sidonia Codex, in the Maya Quiche Maya Bible, Popol Vuh, it says the original book was written long ago, but is hidden from the searcher and the thinker. And we think that this may be the original book. But why it's hidden, we don't know. But if you remember the god, or the what would you call it, Pharaoh of Egypt way back when, was known as Amun-Ra, and that translates to hidden sun. And at one point he was Ra, and suddenly he became Amun-Ra. He went from the sun to the hidden sun. So there's a definite connection, overlap in symbolism with Mesoamerica and Egypt. It's just unbelievable to me that academia can say there was no connection between the two cultures when there's abundant. Your cup runneth over when you study their cultures. So I don't know. It's strange. It's a head scratcher, and I'll let George add his comments.
Yeah, well, that's what Bill and I came to conclude after finding all these structures and seeing that they had these direct correlations with the iconography and different motifs that we found in Mesoamerican art, that there must be some connection to the Maya culture, obviously, if we're finding all this iconography that matches. And this whole idea of the Popol Vuh being a hidden book, may work out nicely with this scenario, but we can just speculate about why they were put there. In the last chapter of our first book, we speculate about why these structures were put there, and there's another connection that we make, that possibly the Olmec were connected with the ancient Anunnaki, which Zechariah Sitchin talks about, going to the underworld, the lower world, or possibly Mesoamerica. So possibly there's some link with this whole Anunnaki culture. And, looking to their mythologies, they talk about the exiling of Marduk onto the planet that they considered Mars. And, he was sent there in exile. And, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to connect the dots and figure that maybe when Marduk was on Mars, of course he had the problems with his father because he was firstborn, but he wasn't the firstborn by a sister, so he wasn't able to become the next in line for the next lineage to be the king. It was his brother Mingasata. So of course, there was all these family problems, and he, of course, was the troublemaker, and Marduk was exiled to Mars. And possibly as an act of blasphemy against his father, he might have constructed all these hidden images about the history of man, the creation mythology in these images that we're finding. And that possibly may be how they got there.
You know,
so that just ties a whole other, string together here.
Right.
So as you can see, it's very difficult for CNN to come on the news and say that they found these structures on Mars and spend 3 weeks explaining to the public what they all mean and the composite images, and it's all. I mean, how many people do you know that know anything about Peruvian art? I mean, Peruvian art is very complex. It's this composite art. It's very difficult to interpret. Scholars are still writing books about this Peruvian composite type art that they have down there, and it's also related to the idea of this two-faced and half images that we're finding in Mesoamerican art. It's very complicated stuff, and it would be very difficult, I think, for any government to go on television and say that, we found structures on Mars and they seem to be connected to the Mesoamerican culture, and then you have Spain and you have Russia saying, well, how come it doesn't reflect our culture?
Mm-hmm.
And then you got terrorist bombers blowing up City Hall and all these. It just would get out of control. It's a crazy world.
Yeah, it's understandable. When
we have discussions, Rick, with people at some of the conferences and things we go to, they find it very difficult to accept that we're finding all these things that deal with Mesoamerican art. Most people that even would be interested in possibly this subject, they have a lot of preconceived notions of their own. And, when people think of finding ruins on another planet, most people think of, Greek buildings and structures, in ruin, because that's what we see here on Earth. It's hard for them to project, with a clear mind what they would find on another planet. I mean, NASA,
our culture.
Even NASA from the beginning said that if we found a face on another planet, it would be symmetrical, which is a Western idea. Totally, like you said, Rick, they're supposed to be scientists, but they totally disregard all of Western art. So if we find sculpture on another, if we find sculpture on another planet, it's going to be a European model, a Western model. Which, that's not scientific. You're already setting up, parameters.
That's the same thing with anthropology, same mentality. And it wasn't until the Lucy skeleton was found, it basically blew the preconceived notion that you were supposed to find an ape walking on knuckles with a large cranium before it could walk upright. Well, sure enough, they find one with a small cranium that was already walking straight. And this destroyed the preconceived notions of some of the Darwinists and evolutionists who walked into it with a subjective attitude like what you're describing. And it was very hard for them to accept that Lucy skeleton, but then all of a sudden other evidence comes along after that supporting that, yes, you don't measure intelligence by the size of your brain. And then shortly after that, it was also realized, hey, with regard to Mesoamerican cultures, you also cannot base intelligence on whether or not a particular culture practiced cannibalism. It doesn't go hand in hand with each other. You can be highly sophisticated and also be engaging in virgin sacrifice or blood worship or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I perfectly understand what you're talking about there. But in relation to what you've brought up so far between the two of you, with everything I've read and learned about over the years, and George, you probably know more about what I'm referring to, but still, I've come to my own conclusions about things, but I want to ask you guys, because I really want your answer. Do you think that the Mayans are connected to these structures on Mars in terms of actually building them? Do you think there's a heritage there? And is there a connection with regard to the Sidonia Plateau to this stuff that's being referred to as enigmatic material? What exactly is enigmatic about it?
Bill?
Oh, yeah, he had asked you, but that's fine. Starting with your last question there about enigmatic, if people are familiar with Zacharias Hitchens' work,
Jaguar. And again, right out of Mesoamerican culture. So the more questions we had, they were easily answered through Mesoamerican iconography. And like all of the research we've done with the face, all these other formations that we find around the face in Cydonia and other parts of the planet all seem to just be explained through this iconography from Mesoamerica.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, I was going to say, I know that a lot of it centers around the relationship between the Mayan and Martian geographs, but you've also mentioned Aztec and Olmec as well. Does this suggest a historical link between all of those Central and South American cultures with Mars? And you've mentioned the other geoglyphs. Is the face the only two-faced structure on Mars?
Well, there's other two-faced structures. That, like I said, our early research, we focused on the face on Mars because that was what Bill and I, when we initially got involved in this, we were interested to see what this face on Mars was and what the NASA photographs were saying or showing us. And looking at the other structures in the Cydonia area as possible analogs to the face on Mars, that we would may possibly find the same two-faced aspect in other mesas, you know, with quotation marks, mesas. Directly below the face on Mars was another mesa that Dr. Tom Van Tranlen initially called the animal. We looked at that and we just simply cut it in half and did a duplication, and we found more Mesoamerican iconography.
Interesting. The with that,
which is all this is explained in the first book.
Right. With
for those at home that want to rush out and buy the book.
And they definitely should too. I would recommend it, but I'm looking forward to reading the second one as well. The with regard to the fact that it's obviously historically we're establishing a relationship here between Mars and Earth, specifically at this point, Mesoamerican cultures, and it begs the question: have you found any examples of these, elsewhere? Specifically, any specific examples of the facial geoglyphs on Earth?
We really haven't found any bifurcated examples on Earth. However, down in southern Peru, in Corral, Peru, in 2001, they found a huge geoglyph that is just half of a face, which we mentioned in the first book. And that's pretty interesting because we also found not only these bifurcated formations on Mars, we also find these mesas and formations that are just half of a face, which is the whole idea, again, which we explain in the book about this ceremonial thing of cutting sculptures and mask in half and burying one half of the figurine or the mask with a deceased lord and then keeping the other half above with the living family. So this whole idea of putting one piece of the sculpture in the underworld and keeping the other with the living people, which again, goes hand in hand with all this Mesoamerican mythology. It's pretty amazing when you stand back, and if the listeners out there decide that they want to purchase these two books, it's just mind-blowing that all of these structures that we're finding have direct relationships with this iconography of Mesoamerica. It's just repetitive over and over and over.
You know what? I understand the term geoglyph, but for the sake of the audience, why would these structures be called geoglyphs? What is the term inspired by?
Phil?
Well, basically, geo in Earth terms, geo means Earth, and we don't really have a term to use for other planets, so we use the same terms that we use on Earth. So geo means of the Earth, And glyph is, of course, people are familiar with hieroglyphs with Egypt, but other cultures use glyphs as well, and those being symbols, pictographic symbols representing different things. In the case of the Maya, the Mesoamericans, their biggest use of glyphs was faces, and as George mentioned, they demonstrated the motif of bifurcated faces, human feline, but they also demonstrated the use of bifurcated face to show duality in life and death. If you go down to the Yucatan Peninsula today, you can even find these bifurcated masks continuing to be made by modern artists, and they're can be found on roadside stands along the highways, and it's a part of the culture that has survived for who knows how long. As George said, the half face in Corral it's about 5,000 years old. So the use of half and bifurcated images in the Americas dates back a long, long way.
Okay, gentlemen, what I'd love to ask you guys is, do you have to mirror many of the faces to be able to see them?
Well, that's kind of subjective. It is difficult. These structures, for some reason, are hidden. They're created to look like normal geological features, and we're not exactly sure why this is the case. They can be seen if you're used to seeing it. I have been looking at, George and I have been looking at these for over 10 years, and I'm finding that it's much easier now. I see, looking at some of these NASA images, I see half faces quite easily now compared to 10 years ago. It was kind of a training of the brain, I guess, to be able to see them. But once you do mirror them, and then you take the mirror away, it's easy to see the half image.
Once you become familiar with the whole, that's why we call it a codex, because it's like you have to break the code.
Okay.
And once you figure out that looking at the face on Mars, that it's actually two different faces and not a symmetrical face, like NASA has been trying to convince the public. When the public looks at just concentrating on the face on Mars here, that your average citizen, when they say that, oh, you found a face on Mars, they're going to look at it and, of course, think that it looks like Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra. But actually, it's a bifurcated face. It's two different faces. And, of course, it's a huge landform that's been altered to have these features. And right from the beginning, they have difficulty seeing it. But we found through having talks and doing book signings and doing lectures and appearing at different functions, that once you have a one-on-one rapport with someone and you're showing them these images and you're showing them where the eye feature is, where the nose is, and where the mouth is, and where the iconography symbols are and what they are, they become amazed, and they can actually see these features without it being mirrored. So then you can show them the actual face on Mars in the raw, and it's readily seen, especially the feline side, which is in much better shape than the humanoid side, I believe. The feline side, once you see the feline aspect of the face on Mars, it just jumps out at you. And it doesn't have to be mirrored. We basically mirror these, so the average viewer, it's easier for them to comprehend what we're looking at. But we're not saying that these things have to be mirrored. And we also, in the new book, we no longer use the term mirroring,
Okay.
Because it's really frowned upon by most researchers. And we found that archaeologists actually do mirroring, but they would never use the word mirroring. They call
Okay.
it duplication or reconstruction.
Duplication and reconstruction.
Right. So I spent years looking for references of archaeologists mirroring things, couldn't find a thing. And then once I found out what the terms they use are different, then it was a lot easier to find. And we actually list almost a dozen examples of archaeologists in the new book that use this technique in their research when they're trying to figure out what these complex Mesoamerican artworks are. And it's used in their
Are you with us tonight?
We're here.
Yes, we are.
Welcome, gentlemen.
George, let's start with you. Let's start with your background and give our listeners just a little bit of background about yourself.
Well, basically, before the Mars research, I started out as an artist, originally from New Jersey, background in drawing, painting, and sculpture. I was the past president of the New Jersey Sculptors Association around 1999 through 2001. As an artist, I exhibited throughout New Jersey, New York. I also exhibited up in New York at the O.K. Harris Gallery, which is run by Ivan Karp.
And Bill, I was curious about you. What is your background?
I'm originally from Edmonton, Alberta, and I graduated from the University of Alberta in Edmonton in 1977 with a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in geomorphology. And then I moved to Calgary, a few hours south, and went to work in the as a geological consultant and exploration and development geologist in petroleum industry here in Calgary, and I'm still currently doing that work.
Excellent. Okay. George, what is the Cydonia Institute?
It's a group of researchers that I put together back in 1991 after reading a book by Randolpho Capuzzo titled The Face on Mars, Evidence for a Lost Civilization. After reading the book, I became convinced that there was really interesting structures on the surface of Mars, and I had a few friends that were interested in this idea, and put together a group of researchers early on, and that's basically how the research group started, just a group of interested people that I had known.
Hey, Bill, when did you become a member of the Cydonia Institute?
Well, shortly after, in 1998, shortly after the Mars Global Surveyor had started taking pictures of the Cydonia area, and Richard Hoagland had a website, Enterprise Mission, and there was some forums on there discussing the images that were coming over, and I started to see some very unusual formations, and having a background in geomorphology, I couldn't explain how all these different features that I was seeing could be explained by features, physical features that we see, or physical phenomena we see on Earth. And I started communicating with the forum, and George was the first one to respond to some of my comments, and so we started emailing each other back and forth and sharing information. And then George sent me some very interesting work that he had done. He entitled it Two-Faced, and I read through it, and I was very impressed, and decided to join George in his research.
And it is, with regard to the, I suppose the face on Mars, is that what got you interested in Mars?
Yes, in 1976, when the original Viking orbiter, the Viking orbiter took the original picture of the face on Mars, I saw it in the newspaper, and I remember thinking, and I can remember the exact moment, sitting on the carpet with the newspaper spread open and going, "Oh my God, that's incredible! That has to be artificial." And then, of course, it sort of disappeared over the years from people's consciousness, and then in 1991. I was alerted to the work of Richard Hoagland and his team as to what they had pursued in studying the Cydonia area around the face, and that got me really interested.
Interesting.
I believe that his book was the Monuments of Mars.
Right. I remember that very well, and I also watched the documentary that was done parallel to it. Do you, I suppose, aside from Richard Hoagland, and this is for both you and George. Do you feel that by the time you started in looking into this, was there already a groundwork laid? I guess you've already mentioned Richard Hoagland, but were there other inspirations as well for both of you to bring you to this conclusion in the research you had done, resulting in what came out of 2005?
Well, I had a similar experience from what Bill had. After looking at Puzo's book, I was introduced to Richard Hoagland by a friend of mine who had seen an ad for his Monuments of Mars on late night TV up in New Jersey. And actually, Richard Hoagland lived right up there in New Jersey, not far from where I was living. And at the time, he had put out a journal, which was a quarterly that I had ordered, and he actually had his home phone number right on the back of the journal. So I had given him numerous calls, trying to, of course, everyone wants to meet Richard Hoagland, and trying to, find out if anything I was finding in some of these images was something that he'd be interested in. So, like Bill Saunders, I also, was introduced to the Monuments of Mars. And through that book, I think Bill and I, we found out about people like Mark Corlato, who was very instrumental in us coming to some of the realizations that we found with these features on the surface of Mars. What you say, Bill?
Yes, definitely. And of course, in Richard's book, he mentioned other researchers like DiPietro and Molinard and Errol Torn. There was a number of other researchers whose work in the early 80s also contributed to Richard Hoagland's work, and also were aiding in convincing me that the structures were artificial in some manner.
I remember reading the first book, the Sidonia Codex, in 2005, and I just remember thinking this was one monumental task, even over 10 years. And I was just wondering, for both of you, did you come up with a game plan, or was it just catch as catch can, or how did you even figure out a groundwork to go from in terms of covering the expansive subject that is in both books?
Well, George, if you'll let me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but George had a background in Mesoamerican art and sculpture, and I find it extremely ironic that this is the case, because it was a culmination of serendipitous occurrences and George's hard digging into Mesoamerican art and sculpture that actually allowed this book to unfold the way it did. A lot of the images that you see in the Sidonia Codex were, or at least the ones that I found, were found without any real knowledge or association with North, Central, and South American art and sculpture and religion or anything else. And it just seemed as anything I uncovered, George was thumbing through his art books and whatnot and finding connections to their society. And it just kept on. As I said, some of it was hard work and some of it was just serendipitous. I know with myself, sometimes I'd just open up a book and it just happened to be on a page that matched something I had just found on the surface of Mars. It was actually quite an incredible few years.
Well, George,
yeah, Rick, to expand on what Bill has said, in the beginning, when NASA took this picture of the face on Mars, and of course it was released in 1976 during that summer, and NASA quickly came out and said that they had taken, another picture a couple hours or days later, and it had disappeared and was just found to be an effect of light and shadow. And the second picture they took, showed that it was just a mesa. And Richard Hoagland, when he came out with his book, he had put up the premise that this original Viking image, he had the side which was the western side, which got most of the light in the Viking image, which you saw this human, almost like a portrait of an individual with a big helmet, and it looked very human. And what he did originally was, I guess, using the mirroring technique. He wanted to see, after Mark Carlotto had enhanced some of the Viking imagery and using some of the work that DePietro and Molinari did, Hoagland, I guess, just on a whim, decided to mirror the humanoid side just to see what it would look like. And to his amazement, it really looked like a humanoid type face. And then he just mirrored the eastern side, which we now see has this feline aspect. So he was amazed that we were seeing this human feline aspect in the face on Mars, and of course he made all of these connections early on with Egyptian culture, relating the face on Mars to like the Sphinx, which has the embodiment of the human and feline, which is like the animal world and the human, in this amalgamation into nature, this human feline type of idea that you see in Egyptian art with the Sphinx. And right from that point on, most early researchers like myself and Bill, we were viewing the Sphinx in Egypt with this direct connection with the face on Mars, that possibly when we got better pictures of the other structures in the area, that we would probably be seeing Egyptian pyramids, and the face on Mars was very Egyptian. However, when we got the 1998 image of the face on Mars, a lot of people were disappointed in what they saw because they had preconceived ideas about what the face should look like. NASA was trying to convince the public that the face on Mars was a human face, something like you'd see with like Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra. It should be symmetrical. However, with Richard Hoagland's early research in his experiments, he saw that it was possibly a bifurcated face. And myself, with my history in art and looking at Mesoamerican cultures and Egyptian cultures and other European cultures, none of them had this bifurcated idea. But when we got the 1998 image, one thing that Bill and I noticed was this emblem on the top forehead of the humanoid side. And when we duplicated the mirroring technique that Richard Hoagland did, we saw that the humanoid side of the face, the emblem that was over there on the top of the head, created this tri-leaf symbol. And that's basically what got us down the path of Mesoamerica, because like Bill was saying, I did all kinds of research trying to find this tri-leaf symbol within Egyptian culture. I couldn't find anything. And I was in a Barnes & Noble going through some books, and I had this book on Linda Shelley, which had all these drawings and all of these diagrams and images of Mesoamerican art. And right there in the book, I saw this mask that had this tri-leaf symbol on the forehead. And I'm like, my God, this is just like we're seeing on the face on Mars. And initially, I didn't even know that Mesoamerican culture made these bifurcated masks with human and feline masks. The first clue we had was this tri-leaf symbol on the forehead. And that's what led us down that path. And like Bill was saying, everything he was finding and sending me links, I quickly went over and checked out some Mesoamerican iconography, and sure enough, there it was. So that's what was serendipity, and it just all seemed to fall in place after that.
George,
sorry I was so long-winded.
That's okay. George, what other parallels have you found between the Maya and the Cydonia face?
Well, over the years, especially with the 1998 image and, of course, the new Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, everything we find, the more pictures NASA takes of the face on Mars, it not only looks more and more like Mesoamerican iconography, as opposed to NASA saying, the more pictures they take, it doesn't look like a human face, because it's not a human face. It's a bifurcated mask, just like we're seeing in the Mesoamerican culture with this humanoid on one side and a feline on the other. And we found at least, 12 or 13 points of iconographic markers that we're finding in Mesoamerican art. To begin with the face on Mars, of course, we found the tri-leaf symbol at the forehead. that tri-leaf symbol is a symbol of corn. It's a corn sprout. And a lot of the lords and the elite in these representations of masks and artwork, we would see this tri-leaf symbol on the forehead. The face on Mars obviously has a human eye on the humanoid side. It also has this flanged headdress when you do the duplication of the split mask just to make the symmetry. That's what Hoagland had looked at early on with this flanged headdress, which he interpreted as being this more of a connection to Egyptian art. And doing our research, I found that the Olmec culture not only had this tri-leaf symbol on the forehead, they also wore flanged type headdress that looked very much like Egyptian art. There's a lot of controversy about the early Olmec culture in the Mesoamerican studies that, you know, is it connected to Africa? You have these huge colossal heads that are found that are carved, these huge head portraits that look very Negroid. They have very African features to the eyes, nose, and mouth. So there's even today there's a lot of controversy in the Mesoamerican community discussing the origins of this Olmec culture. And all of this iconography comes right out of the Olmec culture that we're finding on the face on Mars.
Okay.
And another problem with the early images from even 1998 with the face on Mars, a lot of detractors of the face said, well, there's no real nose formation. I mean, yes, we'll grant you there's an eye formation. There seems to be some decorative ornamentation on the forehead and around the mouth. But the mouth, there's a main tooth which has a circular dot on it, and that is indicative of dental implants that Mesoamerican cultures utilize. Again, another marker for Mesoamerican culture. The nose seems to be obscured by this moth or butterfly shape. It's an enormous formation covering the nose, and we find the same scenario in Mesoamerican art where they produce these large gold structures that go over, or these little ornaments that go over the nose, and they're usually made in the shape of a butterfly or a moth. And this whole idea of moths and butterflies deals with transformation. So you're seeing this human face on one side and the feline on the other, which is a marker, again, for transformation. And the iconography on the face on Mars, you know, again, refers to this idea of transformation. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the butterfly, but the butterfly actually starts out, and the moth is a caterpillar. And they go into a cocoon, and then they transform into this beautiful moth or butterfly. So that's where this whole idea of transformation comes. And this symbol is used in Mesoamerican art for the idea of transformation. And we're finding that right on the face on Mars also.
Excellent.
So that's what we were really intrigued by, that not only did we start seeing this symbolism with the tri-leaf formation on the forehead, everything else in the face started to make more sense to us because it was directly related to these iconographic symbols in Mesoamerican art. And then the feline side basically shows a feline mask with a zigzag shape like a mane or a beard. And Bill and I initially, we were like confused. Well, you know, if this is all, this iconography on the face on Mars deals with Mesoamerican culture, why is there a, you know, mane on this feline face? Of course, you know, lions and things like that are in Africa, not in Mesoamerica. But again, doing the research, we find that the Mesoamerican culture, the Maya, the Aztec, had this mythological creature they called a bearded jaguar, which had a false beard. So what we're seeing here on the face on Mars is not really a lion; it's a bearded